Well, hello and welcome to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. It's David Baer here, and today I want to talk a little bit about the nature of marketing and advertising in the world in which we live. So we're recording this at the beginning of 2023, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. I'm not going to even bother telling you because I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, but you don't want to have to relive whatever we're living through right now. The fact, though, is that in the marketing world, things are a heck of a lot more complicated. And there are so many different directions, channels, options that any business owner can consider these days. I kind of wish that I was, alive a century ago when all you had to do was put an ad in the newspaper. We didn't even have a telephone book at that point, right? Things were super simple back then. And to a certain extent, depending on the business that you have and the audience you're trying to reach, I think it's possible to still emulate that simplicity in one respect or another. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I thought, who better to have come on the show and walk us through this concept of not getting overwhelmed by all of the marketing options that exist and instead just focusing on the marketing options that are right for you, then my neighbor to the north, Ami Sanyal, who is in British Columbia, a good 8-hour drive north from here in Portland, Oregon, but so be it. Anyway, Ami, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Indeed. All right, so I set this up suggesting that you seem to be some sort of expert in this area. And in fact, I know you are because I've looked at the work that you do and some of the stuff that informs it. I know that you have a background in a lot of different roles as a marketer, in-house doing marketing for clients, doing copywriting work. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the subject of marketing options from the perspective of somebody who's been both in the role of trying to figure out how to market yourself and market with others.
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. I think, to your point, we live in this sort of golden age of marketing in many ways. There's never been more options. But again, to your point, that makes it hard, right? It makes it feel like as marketers and small business owners, we have to have these very robust creative teams figuring out the next thing after TikTok or whatever is coming down the pipe. And that gets overwhelming really quick. And what I see is that creativity, as much as it's important in our field, becomes an area where people get stuck. Skilled marketers start to flail when there's this pressure to get everything right. And small business owners, especially, feel like they can't even start to compete and they can sometimes just stall out when it comes to their marketing.
The idea of creativity, I think, is something that a lot of small business owners see in whether it's the media. I mean, I'm thinking of, uh, marketing and advertising represented in fictionalized television. Mad Men is a perfect example, right? Where it felt like it was all about creativity. And it was never, well, they were dealing with large brand corporations, and that's not what a small business needs to do to market for themselves, for example, right? And so there's very few guides out there to or models out there for most small businesses. And I know that you're uniquely positioned in front of the audience that you've chosen to work with to be a guide like that. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what brought you into the role that you play currently with the types of clients you support.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the marketing world, mostly running my own business since I was around 19 years old. And so that journey's been long and twisty, but uh, the short version is I have a direct response copywriting background, and I'm the owner of the Uncommoners Club. And you mentioned our positioning. Basically, we help businesses that give advice do a better job with their marketing and sales so that they can land more ideal clients predictably. So what makes us unique is that we don't just focus on marketing specifically, but we're also optimizing things like their business development and sales. And so with all of that, we're drawing on this concept of direct response and psychology to do a better job of simplifying how they grow their business.
So, for somebody who's listening to this podcast for the first time, maybe you have not encountered the term direct response before, right? And I want to make sure that we cover a little bit more of what that means, as opposed to the type of big brand marketing and other approaches to marketing that we see out there. You want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great point. Direct response is actually kind of a hard to interpret phrase. If you just hear it at surface level, it'd be hard to figure out what that meant. My favorite way of saying it is conversion copy. So conversion is relatively easy to understand. It's copywriting, writing that is going to elicit a response in the reader. Okay, so we aren't writing educational pieces that don't have strong calls to action. We are writing ads. We are asking for sales. We're asking for signups. There is an action at the end.
That's, I think, one of the things that gets lost on a lot of businesses, right? So we started by talking about creativity, and we're now talking about getting people to actually do something. And I think one of the challenges around creativity is that people don't necessarily know what to do. They may know how to feel, but the creativity that exists in a lot of advertising and a lot of marketing materials, even a lot of stuff that gets posted on social media, for example. You mentioned TikTok, a few minutes ago, which I still have not gotten onto and hope I never do. That there's a lot of doing out there that actually doesn't lead somewhere. And
Mhm.
so I hear what you're saying is that you have folks in your world that you are helping support who guide or help solve or teach um, others.
Mhm.
And I assume that it's a lot more efficient to do one of those two approaches to marketing versus the other. What what this is a space I've worked in quite a bit. I started my very first marketing agency back in 2010, and it was a Facebook ads agency. And the people who I saw wanting and begging for help were part of the audience that you support, which are coaches, professional coaches. At that time, I had no idea what a coach was, aside from like a sports coach. And what they were asking for was a lot of what they saw others doing, most of which really wasn't a fit for what they needed. And so I'm curious if you can talk a bit about, I'm going to guess that that still exists, how you start a conversation with somebody who points to, I see, I don't know, Kim Kardashian doing all this cool stuff on whatever social media platform. I want to do that too so I can get clients.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm reading a book right now that was written, I think, in the 50s or 60s by Rosser Reeves. It's called Reality in Advertising. I don't know if you read it,
I
but
love that book.
okay, basically, this is a legitimate Mad Men character from that era, and a big part of this book talks about what he calls window dressing advertising, which is a lot of shiny ideas that have no strong conversion orientation. All right. That is still a problem today. In fact, it's more of a problem today than it's ever been before because the volume of media has increased. So, window dressing ads or marketing today looks like a lot of the material that we're seeing all the time. And so when somebody says, I want it to be like, what's trending right now, that's a really dangerous territory, because if it's window dressing marketing, then you're really investing in a strategy or an idea that's not even working for the person who's publishing it in the beginning. And now you're going to copy that. So how is that going to work out for you? So um, that's the thinking that goes behind, how I would address that. I may not say it in those specific words, but that is very much a problem of marketing and has been for a long time.
Well, and this is actually I'm so thrilled that you brought up that book. It's so uncommon to, well, you run the Uncommoners Club, so of course
Mhm.
you would know it, but it's uncommon that people know that book, know Rosser Reeves, who is credited with creating the unique selling proposition concept. And in that book, which is a lot of kind of technical stuff, but they did a massive study of lots and lots of marketing campaigns. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what types of things were uncovered in the study in terms of the poor decision making that so many businesses actually go through because they're not actually using common sense
Yeah.
to guide them in their advertising and marketing.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I think what you're referring to here is the fact that they actually did a study to say they went to marketing professionals, best in the industry, and said, "Listen, out of all of these different ads that were out in the last year or 5 years, whatever period, tell me what was the best, right?" And basically, the the ads that they selected performed terribly because they were highly creative. They were window dressing ads. They were exciting for the creator and they made other creatives jealous. But it was the ones they selected as the worst that not only performed the best, but like completely blew the competition out of the water. They were like changing industries. And these were the ads that the so-called professionals were like, I'm so glad my name isn't attached to this. I'm so glad I didn't create this. And that's what was performing. So um, I think it's a freeing thought, okay? Because if you see creativity, it's a nice goal, right? You can be an artist and you can be the most creative person, and there is a place for that in this world. But if you want to market your services or other people's work, then take that pressure off and focus on what's actually going to work. And that is actually more accessible and easier to get to.
So I want to get there because obviously there's a lot of different there's tons of distractions that business owners have. But once they come into your orbit and you have the opportunity to sort of direct them and focus them, you want to talk a little bit about the approach that you take and the things that you are prioritizing.
Yeah, absolutely. So from my experience, the best marketing, I work mainly with high ticket coaches, consultants, training providers. And the best marketing in our industry hasn't been created by some award-winning team. It's been written by the actual buyer. All right. And so when I'm focusing on creating some new marketing material for somebody, that's what I want. I want to go and understand that buyer. Um, Something happened to me yesterday, and it comes to mind right now. So I had a surgery way back in 2016, and it was a surgery by my leg. And for a little while, I was limping. Now, at this point, if you saw me walk down the street, you probably wouldn't know that I had a surgery. Totally kind of normal. But yesterday, I was laying on the couch. My 8-year-old kind of ran at me and hit my leg in this certain way, and it made me yelp. All right. And the metaphor here is that I want to understand the buyer and uncover phrases that we can use in our marketing that's going to make the reader have a physical response, have a yelp because they
Mhm.
didn't realize that you were going to tap into that angle. So it's either a deep understanding of the pain that they're going through or a deep understanding of their true desires to the degree where there's a physical and emotional response. All right. And that doesn't come from creativity, that comes from interviews, one-on-one interviews with past clients. It comes from surveys, it comes from research. And so, the whole Abe Lincoln quote of if you only had an hour to cut down a tree, you'd spend 45 minutes sharpening the axe. The parallel here is we need to spend as much time as possible really deeply understanding our customer before we go and try to attract new ones.
So, one of the areas that I think we get pushback as marketers when we talk about this is well, there isn't just one. I can do so many things for so many people. And I'll throw that back at you because I think we all have our ways of responding to that one.
Yeah. I mean, the cliche is you market to everybody, you market to nobody, right? So I think it's very much the truth. When there is a case of that, and there are certain cases where there's multiple demographics, my job as a consultant and a marketer is to bring focus to it. And so a lot of what we do is, yes, uncovering these different angles and ideas from the customers, but then we test what's going to be most likely to work. And so I said we're in the golden age of marketing. This is where it really shines. We're able to do these data-driven tests very inexpensively through tools like Facebook ads, and come back with something to say, listen, you've got your ideas, I've got my ideas. This is what the customer is saying, right? We're able to access this demographic at, half the price as the alternative. What would you like to do? Right? So if you want to spread things out, fine. But there's a data-driven reason for us to bring some focus here. Now, generally speaking, what we end up doing is saying, listen, if you want to do multiple campaigns to different demographics, let's start with one. Let's make that robust and strong, make that engine, making you money, and then we'll bring in the others, right? So it's not a no, it's a let's focus for now.
Okay, so you're going down the path of understanding that there's potentially more different options for a target that you're going to speak to. You settle on sort of the direction with the client on, okay, this is where we're going to focus. We're going to build something. We're going to test it. I know that one of the things that you preach is simplicity in the approach and focus.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you sort through the range of options? I've gone out, I've learned all that I can from, the market to sort of inform what I'm going to say. Well, how do you decide things like where and what you're going to have them do and things like that? Is there a formula to your approach? Not a formula necessarily to what you're building, but to the way that you approach it.
Yeah. So the approach that we take is very step by step. So that deep understanding of the demographics comes first, and we actually have an internal document which we call the language building blocks, where this all goes into. And the simple version of it is that pain and result, those answers are going to go in there, as well as two other factors of credibility and empathy. All right. So how do we show that we are the professional in this case, right? Our client is the professional. And how do they show empathy for the problems and results that they're seeking? Okay, so with all of those pieces, that's how we sort and create the actual copy, right? That's where it's all coming from. That copy then gets tested usually on Facebook ads. We run basically A/B tests to a handful of audiences and a handful of different angles that we could try.
Mm-hmm.
Based on that, the data will tell us, okay, this audience is who we should focus on. This is the specific message that they're most interested in. Now we can go build out a campaign around it. So one of the unique things that we preach is don't go building out massive campaigns on untested territory, right? So say you want a webinar. Well, if you did this approach, you'd end up testing 4 different webinar concepts. Now, if you ran 4 different webinars, that's a lot of resources that you're devoting to something that you're not sure is going to work, or one of them is going to work best. Instead, could you do a small test basically ask the audience by generating actual registrations to webinars that don't exist, right? So that allows you to say, okay, we got a handful of registrations. We know that this is the topic we're going to chase up. Now I'm going to go build out the entire funnel. So this is the thinking, the approach that we take to making sure we aren't wasting resources kind of spinning our wheels, but we're just getting laser focused on what's going to perform the best.
I love that example of the webinar that doesn't exist, having an ad campaign, because I just had that conversation last week with a dental office that wanted to do just that. I want to build out this whole thing and I have the perfect idea and I know how it's going to work. And I said, well, wait a second, how much money you want to spend on or waste on this, I guess I should say. So that's a point that I think bears repeating, because a lot of businesses don't think about what they're giving up by just going and moving forward with their grand plan, and pausing and testing and figuring out what does the market tell us they want. And so thank you for walking us through that.
Yeah, I think what's exciting about it, David, is that it takes a few egos out of the equation. It takes ego to run a business. That's probably one of the requirements of being a business owner is a little bit of ego, right? And that gets in our way when we are making big decisions around growth and marketing because we think we know our customer better than anyone. It also takes ego to be a marketer, right? We become experts in our field. We understand what works and what doesn't. But when we're able to just turn and say, listen, we both have our opinions, but let's make sure that the customer is included in this conversation and has the ultimate say. And that's what this kind of process brings. It's saying, okay, I'm gonna move forward with something that's in line with our business. Of course, it's got to be on brand and it's got to make sense for us. But ultimately, the customer makes the decision, and that's a fun way to grow a business.
So you were giving some examples of some of the things that you do in collecting language, and you mentioned empathy, and this is not the right word. This is not the word that you use, but something like authority or
Credibility, yeah.
credibility. Thank you. How how does that show up in the work that you then produce?
In a in almost every conversion piece that's written, whether that's an ad or a webinar or whatever is being created, credibility has a very strong role to play, right? As much as uh, marketing is effective, there's a lot of jaded people out there. Everyone's got a sensor on looking for BS, right? And we have to address that. And one of the strongest ways we can do that is through credibility. So, an example, we were working with a financial advisor that through this process uncovered that millennials were their strongest demographic to focus on. And so we talked about the sheer number of millennials he's helped over the last 10 years. And we talked about the specific problem that he helps, right? So it's an opportunity to highlight the breadth of knowledge and experience you have. This is the place that the awards would go, the editorial mentions, those places, right? People sometimes put those places, these credibility indicators too high, right? We're focusing kind of at the top of the funnel. You land on most people's websites and you see as seen on, right? You see a ton of these things. Oftentimes that's misplaced. We need to focus first on getting someone's attention, that Yelp out loud pain point, and focusing on that first. And then when we're moving towards consideration, credibility becomes a more and more important factor to include.
Okay, I want to extract some of the points that you made there, because you're talking about where somebody's mind is as they're going through the process of looking around for a solution to a problem, to trying to decide between different solutions. And this is, you mentioned consideration as sort of the next step. So you got their attention, and they're aware that you exist, and now they got to figure out, well, am I going to learn more about this? Do I want to go in that other direction? Do I want to give up altogether on this search? So there's different, as I understand what you're saying, um, different opportunities for a business to put ideas or information in front of people at different points in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a bit of flexibility. I don't think this is a hard and fast rule, but at the end of the day, getting someone their attention has to be first and foremost, right? And that's where this whole process of speaking to you and getting to know your customers is so important. We put that first. Credibility is going to be either middle or bottom of a conversion piece, because they're going to go through a journey with you, right? Where they're listening up to what you have to say. And at a certain point, that creeping feeling of, oh, this is probably some guy just trying to sell me something, or this isn't real, or whatever, starts to come up. And that's what credibility addresses. So understanding the the psychological responses that your reader is going through is going to help you place these elements of credibility and empathy. Empathy is another really interesting one. We can't always use it, but when we can, it's very powerful. If you are dealing with a very acute pain, one of the best things you can do is say, I've been there too. This was my story, right? And it brings you together. You're not just some other company trying to sell something to me. You are me. You are one of us, right? And so understanding the placements of these two other factors can be really, really important to the success of an overall campaign.
And you just brought in a notion from a book that we talk about quite a bit here on this podcast, and without giving it away, I imagine that the book by the professor down in Arizona that I'm referring to. Well, I'm looking at your
I'm not
face like
sure.
I'm wondering what you're going to say now. So
I'm not 100% sure. Which
yeah,
book is it?
well, it's the work that we see in the marketing world from the behavioral psychologist Robert Cialdini.
Oh,
And
yes.
you were talking a little bit about one of the 7 different areas of persuasion that he was talking about, but there's lots of these psychological um, connections and triggers that you've been talking about throughout what you've been describing here, and it's I think an area that a lot of businesses either are just totally unaware of, take for granted, ignore, or have never spent the time to even consider, what is the person on the other side of this relationship actually experiencing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, and it's one of these rare cases of the more experience you have, the worse you're going to be at this, because take marketing as an example, right? You're doing a good job of pausing and backtracking on what I'm saying to make sure that it's something that people can understand. You can't help but start using words and processes of thought that are less and less accessible the deeper you get into a topic. You know what I'm saying? So the important thing to understand with whether you're doing a small social media piece, you're doing an ad, a massive campaign, whatever it is really touching base with what the customer is going through. Because if you lose sight of that, you can speak at that expert level, and really you're just talking to your peers at that point, which is not the ideal audience.
Well, I want case in point, right? At the beginning of a process of booking somebody as a guest, there's a question that I ask, which is, please provide a bio that I can use to introduce you. And anybody who listens to this knows that I typically don't read anybody's bio verbatim, because it's often filled with very specific industry focused jargon, right? So had I read your bio, it would have said, and I have it up here on my screen in front of me, there's a sentence in here: one recent project had a ROAS of 1,166% in the first month. I'm sure that less than 1% of our listening audience would have any idea what I was talking about had I actually read that. Now, here's the point I want to make, right? It is about making sure that we are accessible to the audience that we're in front of, but that's not actually the point. I want to congratulate you, because it is so, again, uncommon, and I'll just play off of your business's name because it's such a smart name, apparently, to find an individual who has both the technical savvy to be able to look at metrics and allow it to inform stuff, and all of the psychological stuff that you've just been talking about. So I'm curious to understand where that all came from and how it all came together.
That's an interesting question. I think it's just down to personality. I think I've always been somebody like you that loves to learn, and when I get involved with a topic, I go down rabbit holes. And so that does lend itself well to technical understanding. Yeah. But on the other side, I've got a deep respect for people who understand psychology, for the way people work, and for writing in ways that inspire action. So those are the two sides of my personality. My first access point into marketing was as a photographer. So much closer to the creative side now than I am where I focus on strategy and copy. But there's always been this idea of how do I make what I'm doing work better? And that's you can't really get to the bottom of that question without having a deep understanding of metrics.
You've been doing this for a decade or more now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, where do you expect you want to be going? What are the new things that you want to be learning? We talked about being, constant learners, I think before we hit record, but um, that's going to continue to enhance the stuff that you're doing for yourself personally, as well as to be able to contribute more to the clients you're serving.
That's a really interesting question that I've been reflecting on lately. I think one of the curious things about marketing when you're working with small business owners is that sometimes creating the marketing campaign is not the hardest part. It's actually having them execute on a really high level with the sales. The reason being is that a lot of the clients that we work with, they come to us after being quite successful as a referral based business. And what that means is they have a really good fulfillment process. Like they know how to execute at a high level and they're getting referrals. That's fantastic. But their sales game is not quite at the level it needs to be for a marketing campaign to really thrive. What that means is they're not used to the volume of leads. They're not used to having to have processes in place for no shows, or they're not used to having people they need a little bit more convincing, right? And so your whole entire sales process really needs to grow and adapt if you're going to create a machine that's not dependent on referrals to grow the business. And so long story short, the areas that I'm looking at is how do we fix this problem for our clients in a really robust way? And that's the area that we're going to be growing. We already do it to some degree, but are there opportunities to make that sales and business development side of the businesses that we work with a little bit easier?
Yeah, I think that we often take for granted, particularly those who are professional marketers, not realizing the impact you have on the other parts of a business. And so the fact that you're sort of considering both pieces of the puzzle in terms of, revenue expansion, right? How do you bring the new people in? How do you maybe keep the current people there coming back for more? How do you manage the people who get referred through a process that the client business has more control over, and then how do you move them through that entire process into becoming, into a new or continued transaction?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I, I'm I feel like I have a kindred spirit, on the other side of this Zoom call, and I'm so thrilled that you are sharing the logic, the wisdom, and insight of the time that you've been doing this and the work that you've been doing with your clients. If folks are out there running a business in the space that you specialize in, and they want to learn more about the work that you do, the work, I still want to know where the name Uncommoners Club came from, so you'll need to let us know that before we wrap up. What's a good next step for folks to find you and reach out?
Absolutely. So our website is uncommonersclub.com, and that's where you can find out more about our agency, or you could just connect with me on LinkedIn, Ami Sanyal. I'm relatively easy to find there. To answer your question about the name, I founded this company with my sister, and it was actually her existing business at the time. It was social media based agency, so she had the name before I even hopped on board. So it wasn't my inspiration, but here I am with it.
Well, brilliant. Is your sister still part of the business?
No, she actually has her own company now.
Ah, okay. And you have a team that's working to support the work that you're doing as well, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have several subcontractors that we work with and a handful of more regular employees as well.
Well, brilliant. We will make sure, of course, to leave links to both the Uncommoners Club website as well as your LinkedIn profile page in the show notes. Ami Sanyal, thank you so very much for joining me. This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
My pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
Indeed. Folks, if you know somebody who can benefit from listening to the conversation you just heard, please, by all means, share it. In the meantime, my name's David Baer, and I hope to see you back here on another episode of More Perfect Marketing. Take care.